All right. Well, we can jump into it then. So I do believe Dr. Brandy Brown and Regina Strong will be coming in throughout the event, but I know they couldn't make it right on time. But thank you again for everyone who's here and who's listening. My name is Chelsea Spayman, and we are on the second panel discussion of two for the Environmental Justice Panel Series hosted by the Western Student Association, the Lewis Walker Institute, and the Office for Sustainability. I am the current WSA Vice President for Sustainability, and I will be one of your moderators today. I am also joined by one other student moderator, Student Body President Taylor West and Lewis Walker Institute, in turn. I will be moderating questions, and Taylor will primarily be behind the scenes, running the technology aspect and filtering questions. The focus of the second panel today is to address environmental justice in the Kalamazoo area, community action, and state policy. The structure of this event includes a discussion and then a question portion, and then this will hopefully give you the tools to understand how populations within our country and our community have continuously been marginalized and put at risk. By utilizing the diversity and knowledge surrounding environmental justice in our own community, we hope to further educate and inspire you, the attendees, to inform and spread awareness around the issue as well as take action. Now, we only have a short window today for questions, so we're going to prioritize those that were submitted before the event, and then we're going to get to the ones that you guys sent throughout. So while we're working through the questions, feel free to send them in the chat, and Taylor's going to organize them. And before we get into questions, I'd like to take this time to ask our lovely panelists to introduce themselves and their backgrounds, starting with Dr. Luchar Wallace.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Luchar Wallace, and I have the honor and pleasure of being the director of the Lewis Walker Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnic Relations. But even more than that, I'm actually a native of North Carolina, and we are known to be one of the founding places that focused first on environmental racism. And so environmental justice is something that I've been focusing on since I was actually in college. So I'm so honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
You guys can just hop in wherever.
Sweet. How are you guys? Can you hear me? You coming through? No? Hello? A little bit. Is it better? A little bit? Okay. How are you guys? My name is Daniel Gayden. I'm a senior jazz studies performance major. So I'm a drummer and composer. I'm very honored to be here today and try to give a perspective of how you can use your passion and love and tools to help express what you're passionate about, right? And to help express what you can do to better your community. So I'm very honored to be here from Chicago, Illinois, South Side. So, yeah.
Well, I can jump in there. Hello, everyone. My name is Patrice Griffin, and I am a lifelong Kalamazoo resident. I'm currently serving as the Vice Mayor of the City of Kalamazoo. I am so honored to be here with this esteemed panel. Environmental justice is something that only became something familiar to me within the past, I would say 5 to 7 years. And it's just amazing how much that ties into I'm a housing advocate, but how much of that work just intersects. So again, I'm so happy to be here with you all and looking forward to this discussion.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Spoelstra. I'm the director at the WMU Office for Sustainability. And I have a unique role, I think, as a bridge between students on campus and my city of Kalamazoo. I've been a resident for over 15 years and worked in environmental consulting and also watershed coordination at one point prior to WMU. So I have a number of overlaps that sort of span water quality, contamination sites, and other related issues. I'm looking forward to this, and I hope to listen and really think of ways to connect future Broncos to local action in the community.
Thank you so much for those introductions. if or when Brandy or Regina can join us, I'll have them just give a quick one because I don't think I can quite do it justice. So just to, oh, hello, Brandy. I know you're still connecting, but I would love it if you could give us a quick introduction because we were just about to get into it.
Were you speaking to me, Chelsea?
Oh, yes. Would you mind giving us a quick introduction? We were just about to get into questions.
Sure. So I am Dr. Brandy Brown. I am the Climate and Energy Advisor within EAGLE, and I am leading the My Healthy Climate Plan, developing that with guidance from the Council on Climate Solutions that the governor created earlier this year. I'm happy to be here speaking with you guys.
We're honored to have everybody here. So just for some clarification, last week we had Dr. Sibel Shattuck and Dr. David Benak, our lovely panelists. They helped us establish the historical background of environmental justice in the United States and some of the framework in Michigan, and they really kind of walked us through the role of grassroots organizations in this movement. And this week we're going to talk a lot about Kalamazoo, the surrounding community, community action, and state policy. So just to kind of get into it, have there been any major cases of environmental injustice and racism in the Kalamazoo and surrounding area? You guys can jump in anytime.
This is Patrice Griffin here. I'll just jump in. There absolutely are effects of environmental racism in the city of Kalamazoo. So as I stated earlier, I am a lifelong Kalamazoo resident. I grew up on the east side of Kalamazoo. I currently live on the north side of Kalamazoo, two areas that are primarily Black. The 90% of the north side is Black. If you ever talk to anyone who lives in these areas, they will tell you about a smell that has existed for as long as I can remember. And there are people, their air quality, the asthma, and certain just certain things, certain health issues that people are experiencing when they live on other sides of town. They don't experience this. An example I'll give is there is a 14-year life expectancy gap within a 2-mile zip code between 49007, which I live in, and 49009. So I will just leave that there as an example of environmental racism that is occurring right here in the city of Kalamazoo.
That is pretty powerful, if not just really sad. Is there any, do you guys know of any historical cases in the Kalamazoo area? I mean, no, we have a major oil spill. I know the Kalamazoo River turned white at one point and ended up on, I think it was Time Magazine. I know that there are some big cases, and I was curious if there was any insight into those as well.
Chelsea, I think of a few common things for the region over the years. Mercury pollution floating in from coal plants to our west has been a ubiquitous regional problem. More locally, older cities suffer from lead paint, leaded gasoline in the past that tends to stay near roadways and neighborhoods. Lead pipes carrying water. Most cities have problems, some worse than others and some really terrible, right? I think all of those are pretty common. Kalamazoo, of course, the PCB contamination in the river that we're unfortunately globally known for. The sort of pathway for PCBs is through the flesh of wildlife like fish. So people who choose to eat fish out of the river or must eat fish out of the river or kind of feel like they don't have any other option. For several decades, the PCB contamination was a vector there. And all of that has cumulative impacts, I believe. And these are related challenges.
Absolutely. And I know, Vice Mayor Griffin, you were talking a little bit about the communities in Kalamazoo. What specific communities or neighborhoods do these injustices around us tend to affect? And what do the demographics look like?
Well, they tend to be low income, where people are in poverty, or where you will have a high concentration of people of color, specifically Black and Brown. And that is as a result of redlining, and where people are living. You know, the maps of the 30s look very similar to the maps currently in our communities. And so where industrial areas were able to thrive are happen to be in the same areas where, you know, these communities, my community was able to exist. And so you will see those line up quite well.
If I'm able to tell a quick story, like I said, I'm not originally from Kalamazoo, from Chicago, Illinois. I remember when I got accepted into Western Michigan University, one of the first few people I told was a literature teacher. And his response to me was, "That's in Kalamazoo, right?" And I was surprised that he knew where it was. I said, "Yeah, it is in Kalamazoo." And he mentioned that's the very, like the segregated city, right? Where things are kind of different with the environment and the communities based on the size, right? And I said, I don't know, right? But to think about that now, right, as a senior, it just gives me a little bit more insight that what we do as a city, as a community in Kalamazoo, doesn't just impact us directly, but it shows, you know, our growth shows. And I think it's important, you know, sometimes we view that, okay, what we do here is only going to impact us, or we're only going to know about it. But yeah, it doesn't, and it stems farther than that. And I think the faster we realize that, the more helpful we can become.
I'd like to chime in here. That's a really good observation. When we think about our energy systems or anything we're doing that impacts the environment, it doesn't just impact the communities where we site generation or where we site hazardous waste materials. It affects the entire region. Ultimately, it affects us globally, the entire global community. And so we need to begin thinking about those impacts, not on it affecting those folks over there and not us, that it is going to impact the air we breathe, our food systems. It's going to impact our community and livelihood. And the more that we can identify those impacts, quantify those impacts, communicate those impacts, in a way that it burdens everyone, that we're all in this together, is how we're going to get folks at the table. And that's something that we're trying to do with our climate solutions and developing a plan for Michigan, making sure that we're building in the equity at the outset of the plan, not after the fact, once we've decided solutions, but before we get started, how are we going to think through very thoughtfully and just think through how are these decisions, how is this system burdening folks now, and who is it benefiting, and how do we maybe alleviate some of the harms that we've caused in the past?
Absolutely, I definitely agree. And Daniel, that was an interesting story. I didn't realize that many people outside of Kalamazoo would understand what was going on here. And unfortunately, it's reflected in a lot of communities. And, you know, speaking of our communities, and Brandy was talking a bit about how do we recover them, have there been any major recoveries or, you know, pushing forward in our community? Have we seen any noticeable changes?
If you think generationally, so I'll take it way back. My family has been certain parts of my family have been in Kalamazoo for a few hundred years. And as we were storytellers, we have strong oral tradition. And as we tell the stories, we tell the changing landscape of Michigan, from it being deforested to the different industrial plants coming here, polluting the water and the air, and how things have changed. So we've had vast change. Chelsea, and you mentioned an oil spill that affected the waters here. So there's been drastic change. I think while that change has occurred, our society changed. We had the Industrial Revolution, and there's pieces of our environment that we purposely separate ourselves from, so we may not notice everything that's impacted. Have there been positive change in the last few decades? Yes, as we start to acknowledge some of the harms that we've caused. When the Kalamazoo River had white foam on it when my dad was younger, at that time, it was okay to dump everything in the water. People didn't think twice about it. Now we know you should not do that. So we have had since I think the 70s, late 70s, we've had some changes. Are they enough? No. There's a lot more work that needs to be done.
I definitely agree. And I can't really speak much to the Kalamazoo area, but I know that from the east side of Michigan, where I'm from, my dad likes to tell me all the time that where I grew up used to be all cornfields and now it's all houses, which is a bit unfortunate. But because I know that you guys have talked a bit about environmental justice. Vice Mayor Griffin, you have talked about how this is something that's come to attention to you only within the past couple of years or so. Is there a history with Kalamazoo and the surrounding community with the environmental justice movement? Have we seen a progression, or has it been, gradual, or how has that relationship been?
Well, I'm sure that there are other people who can certainly speak to it better than I, of the length of the relationship and the various interactions that grassroots organizations have had with the city of Kalamazoo as a government entity. I know very recently, the city of Kalamazoo in 2019 has accepted, the climate emergency declaration. And kudos to everyone involved with that and all the work that went into making that happen. I know that was a huge step to, acknowledgement is foundational, right? And so you have to acknowledge something in order to, work. And so now we are at the place of creating actionable steps in order to, see the changes that we wish to see. So, we're getting there, and thankfully to all of the people who really put in the work and all the grassroots organizations, I believe that we will start to see some of the outcomes that we need in order for our community to thrive and to reverse some of what has been in existence for way too long.
Absolutely. Jeff, I know you have a little bit of context, at least, about how the movement's transformed on, Western's campus, which I know isn't the whole city, but it is a good 20,000 students.
Yeah, I've been a Bronco about 10 years, and I work day to day mostly with undergraduate students, sometimes graduate students, and they're all motivated to make change, and they come with completely different life experience and levels of experience and knowledge of the campus internally and the politics and the history. And that's different from their knowledge of the local community around campus, right? Whether that's the city or a township or Portage or the Kalamazoo County. And generally everyone I meet wants to make change, and they aren't sure what to do next. So one of our roles here is to try to find and connect them with people. And over time, students early were really focused on sort of on-campus environmental recycling, and that's moved more towards waste management, composting, and gotten more sophisticated, which is moving more towards climate action and resilience, and moving now especially towards environmental justice and inclusion and all the overlapping issues and intersectionalities. And it's exciting. It's sort of forcing everyone to pull it all together. And I spent the last couple of days trying to think through all of the organizations that are doing the work, on campus and near campus. And you sort of end up picking every organization, like whether it's someone's promoting local food or promoting river cleanup or promoting and advocating and educating on lead paint abatement, asbestos abatement, rental housing, fair, affordable housing, just all sorts of efforts that really do intersect. So it's almost like is there one organization branding itself as the environmental justice organization that's been here forever? I don't know which one that would be. But there are many, and they sort of ebb and flow and they interact and don't, but more these days, I feel like they're sort of all coalescing. If you think of things like the Green New Deal as a structure, I think orgs are moving that way sort of organically. And I think it's a really great thing.
Absolutely. And you talked a bit about, what organization is doing things. I know that at least Dr. Wallace, you have a lot of connections in the community. Do you guys know of, any projects or what organizations are doing work in Kalamazoo, and what kind of projects are they doing? Because I don't know that a lot of people understand what addressing environmental justice in the community looks like.
That's a great question, Chelsea. I think you really brought up a really great point. Or actually, I think, Jeff, you might have been the one bringing up the point that there are a lot of different organizations that are addressing different components of our environmental justice problems. So I cannot say that I'm an active member of a particular environmental justice organization. However, or that I can even name those specific ones in the community. So please type in the chat so we can let people know. But what I can do is say that you've got a lot of grassroots organizations who might have a specific focus or interest in, say, housing, or, like even with the People's Food Co-op. I mean, the whole purpose and awareness for those organizations help to inform how we even function. They help to inform the policies that we advocate for. I think, Sibel just brought up in the chat something I really wanted to lift because it's so important and key. When we think about energy justice being a part of environmental justice, and energy justice is a situation that is important in our city, in our community, as it relates to those who are renters, those individuals who are poor and often under-resourced and underserved, and how are we allowing those individuals to have access to housing that has inadequate insulation, which therefore increases their light and electricity bills, which places them in a further bind. So those are a few things that I think it's important for us to consider when we look at, what organizations are doing what. It's really a broad swath. And I think it's important to remember that this conversation about environmental justice doesn't always say the name environmental justice. So much of it has to do with social justice and what's right. I hope that answers part of your question, Chelsea, even though I couldn't give you specific organizational names because there's so many.
No, that was great. I do think it's important to acknowledge that just because it's not specifically environmental work doesn't mean that it's not, the common goal. And the common goal is that everybody has equitable living standards. So,
if I can say
oh,
really
go ahead.
Chelsea. I know I was having little mic problems, but yeah, I think the biggest thing to build off of that is to first try to fix the relationships between minorities and the environment and outdoors to begin with, right? If we don't see ourselves in our representation to see this is a relationship that needs fixing, that needs improving, then we're not going to be focused enough to try to fix it or try to heal ourselves or heal that relationship, right? So knowing, that some of our school buildings are run down and old, and so things of that nature, parks, right, in the inner city, like I said, coming from the south side of Chicago, having outlets to just be outside, be safe, right? So first building a relationship up and having organizations that build that relationship, and the arts do that very well, to know that it's a problem that needs fixing, even though you might not be extremely knowledgeable about the environment, knowing that it's something that's worth investing in, right?
Absolutely. And I didn't know if anybody wanted to build off of that, but I do have a little bit of a target question. And I know that you've already addressed this, Vice Mayor Griffin, but what is the current role of our local governments in, this movement? I know you've talked a little bit about it, but is this like a specified role, or is it just kind of, like you said, acknowledging it? and building from there?
I think it's both and, right? So the city of Kalamazoo in and of itself does not do environmental work, as it doesn't do so much, but what it needs to do is create an environment that fosters, you know, everything that's needed to create safe spaces for people to live in, and the environments that they live in are part of that. And so whether that be policy creation that supports that, having an overlying understanding of looking at the environmental aspects of whatever is presented that the city has anything to do with, internally, you know, the procedures and the practices, all of that, with that lens. And so it's going to take the experts in this space, the community in this space, to really hold electeds accountable to make sure that these plans are created and that they're acted out in such a way that we will see change happening. And as I said before, I think that we're getting to that space where we're going to have actionable steps that's done, but we're going to definitely need for community to stay engaged, and keep giving us your impact, your input and feedback. I don't know if anyone had a chance to see one of the, I guess, pluses of the impacts of this pandemic is that we've been pushed into this virtual space. Well, people who would not normally have access or who would not normally be involved in government are now involved, because our commission meetings, our board meetings are aired live on Facebook as well as YouTube. And so we just went over our 2022 plans for our budget, and one of the items that was lifted up is to be intentional about environmental, that lens, and looking at everything through an environmental lens, so that when something comes to the commission, for example, maybe from the brownfield or some development wants to happen, we need to see the environmental impacts. We need to know, as Dr. Brandy mentioned earlier, we need to know that on the onset, so it's not an after. Because afterwards it's too late, and too long we've been looking at things through an equity lens, through an environmental lens, too late.
I definitely agree. We need proactive measures instead of reactive measures, because that's kind of all we've been doing up to this point. And, I know we've been talking a lot about our local government, and Dr. Brown, I know you can give us a lot of insight as to, what's happening at the state policy level for environmental justice and equitable living standards.
Well, I'll be able to give you less on the environmental justice view at the state, because the environmental justice advocate for the state, Regina Strong, should be joining us a little later. So I'll save that for her. But what I can say is that leading the Office of Climate and Energy, one of the first things I did, I think on my first day, was find Regina, sit in her office, and pepper her with questions about what I needed to know going into this role. Even though I am a woman of color, I've experienced poverty. I have family who are still experiencing poverty and energy burdens. Even though I come with that perspective, I was an energy wonk. I understand the background of our energy systems, how to change that, but I am not an academic in the space of energy, environmental justice, or any of that work. So leaning on Regina was key. I think the governor was really wise to create both of our offices and put us both with an eagle, because that allowed us to tag team on many different issues, to the point that folks are probably sick of me and Regina and Nina going head to head on issues and, supporting each other. If folks don't know, Nina Sassy is the drinking water public advocate, and she's doing some great work repairing water infrastructure around the state and pushing on that issue for communities. So essentially what I'm trying to say is that even before I figured out how to do my job, I sat down with Regina, I sat down with Nina to understand what their perspectives were, understand what the barriers were. And then every time I started working on something, I tagged Regina. Hey, what do you think? What do folks in your space think? Regina leads the Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice, and that's why she's not here right now. And that is a body of folks appointed by Governor Whitmer from around the state who are experts in this stuff, who are seeing it happen in communities over decades and know what needs to be done to fix it. So they're pushing on us to get better and do better, and it's our job to figure that out. So Regina and I created the Climate Justice Brain Trust. So that's a subgroup of the MACEJ, the Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice. And we are meeting with them frequently before we plan. So I plan the council, the Governor's Council on Climate Solutions, and they help me walk through the issues. If we need to talk about energy, like we will next week, okay, who has our energy system burden? Who has it benefited? Let's talk about that. Let's put that right out front, and let's ensure that whatever investments that we make and whatever plans we lay is not an inequitable distribution of resources. And let's see what we can do to remedy some of the harms that we've caused as a society in the past. So that's the high bird's eye view of how we're getting it done. The specifics, I'm happy to say, I don't know yet on the climate side. I hope, and I hope that the outcomes we produce are addressing some of these issues. I am determined to ensure that they do. We're not there yet. My Healthy Climate Plan will likely be in development through next year.
Thank you so much for that. I wasn't sure if anybody else wanted to hop in, but I will save some of our questions about state policy for when Regina can get here, but we'll try not to bombard her too much. So I guess we can kind of switch gears for now. And I'm going to target you a little bit, Jeff and Dr. Wallace, if you guys have some insight. How has WMU or other higher education institutions played a role in promoting environmental justice and, you know, being a leader like I think higher education is considered to be?
Well, when I look at the role of higher education, I'm going to kind of go in a different direction than you're probably thinking. One of the greatest things or contributions that I think that we make is that we provide space for student voices to be heard and for student protest and agitation. And the reason that I think that that is a beautiful opportunity at the university level is because we don't have all the answers in our local communities. And a lot of times our student voices are the ones that actually push us to make the changes that we need to make. I want to say, and Jeff, you can correct me, I feel like it's been about 12 to 15 years, and maybe it's been longer, but I think it was only about 12 to 15 years that we began to institute having our refillable water bottles on campus. I mean, if you remember, there was a time when everybody would just get disposable cups, disposable bottles, and there was no incentive to make sure that we really and truly considered how are we what consumables are we using on our campus? And for me, that's one great example of a way that our university students made a huge impact on the practices of the university. It was not the university saying, oh, this would be a great idea. It's going to have an environmental impact. It's going to save us money. No, that had to come from the agitation and agitation is a good word. I'm not saying that as a bad thing. It had to come from our students making an impact and lifting and using their voices so that we could begin to change what we're doing. And now in our new dining hall, we have not only are we focusing on using reusable diningware when we're able to get back to that place, but also making sure that we're now composting. Like, who does that? We do that. Why do we do that? Because our students pushed for that. So to me, that's kind of the role of university, is that we involve and we engage in a way that pushes people to do things that they would not typically do on their own. And it forces their communities to do the same. Jeff, now you've got the big answers.
Yeah, there's sort of two levels here to build off of that. These projects can have multiple benefits. We have lots of people started using reusable stuff. Now the culture has really shifted towards water bottles. Look around at people carrying their reusable water bottles all over the place. Western now has over 80 water bottle filling stations. So one thing leads to another. for reusable products. And you can look at that as a long-term win. Making compost means we have local soil amendments that we can give back to campus and use ourselves to grow food and give back to dining halls, or donate it to the Invisible Needs Project, the food pantry on campus. We do that, and that's a demonstration of a circular economy concept, right? If you can take waste and turn it into something valuable and use it locally, then you've eliminated transportation and you have taken advantage of sort of these compounding benefits. So that's an educational thing that's sort of built from what students really pushed for. And I'll tell you, students want climate justice now. They want a just transition to a renewable future. And I think Western's answering the call, the administration with the Carbon Neutrality Committee, I believe is listening to that student call, and we have just launched that committee. And I will be looking to folks on the call, including the city of Kalamazoo. They are writing their own climate action plan to talk about, town gown, campus community resilience. How do we help each other? What happens when the next heat wave hits and we have people that need help? What happens when, post-COVID, what's the next event? What's the next polar vortex and natural gas failure, right? And if those compound each other, holy cow, like we need to help each other with safe spaces for heating and cooling, or replacement of water that's contaminated. And that only happens when, municipalities talk to one another and higher ed talks to municipalities and thinks ahead at the climate changes that are already happening. And students already know. They know things are changing now and that change is accelerating. So that's right on the tip of their tongue. And I would say they're hyper aware of equity. And it was mentioned earlier by another panelist, folks who've been profiting for a long time should not be the only people to benefit from a just transition to a renewable energy future and to a less contaminating future. The products we use, the processes we use, industrial agriculture, right? Things contaminate and have long-term effects. Those are massive changes that are just simply expected by my student colleagues here at Western, and they are looking for the levers to push to get there.
Thank you, Jeff. And Dr. Wallace, since I didn't get to say that yet, I wasn't sure who raised their hand first. Daniel, I know you have a question to pose, and I know that a question was posed to you, Dr. Brown. So whoever would like to hop in.
Yeah, I can address the question that Dr. Wallace posed to me. So just for everyone's knowledge, I have 3 beautiful blessings who are little clones of me in different ways. And they teach me how to not be an annoying individual as an adult, because they show me that sometimes how I can be kind of quirky. But anyway, my son, who is now 13, is a quite curious child, studies different aspects of the world. And Dr. Luchar Wallace has been really impressed by his study of mealworms to decompose styrofoam. So occasionally he has me order him vats of bugs to do different things. And it is always a difficult, Jeff remembers the whole beetle discussion he had with him, I think 1.5 years ago. Xander has not forgotten that. So that is a common thing in my house. It's why we don't have visitors, even pre-COVID, because we have lots of bugs that are doing different things, and it's just kind of nasty. But the other thing I wanted to say, to just piggyback off what Jeff said, was that as a proud Bronco and leading the climate fight here in Michigan, I would love to see Western take a look at the circular outputs, the circular impacts that we have had on the Kalamazoo community. And if we are very concerned and serious about impacting climate justice issues, impacting environmental justice issues, to take a look at what we're putting out. One of the top disproportionate impacts on communities is transportation emissions. So what is our vehicle fleet at Western? What neighborhoods are we going through? As a lot of us have commuted to campus, what are we driving and what neighborhoods are we driving through? Think of all of those neighborhoods we drive through. A lot of them have been hit hard economically, but are the same ones who will be hit hard by climate impacts. They're already being hit hard by energy burdens. So if we can lessen our negative input on the air quality in the community just by choosing, if we're able to hit a stretch goal of an electric vehicle, when we get there, I can tell y'all, I'm still not there where I can afford an electric vehicle, but we're gonna get there one day. And when we get there, I'm gonna hope to put some solar panels on my home so that fuel is not at all coal-based, that it is renewable. So those are the decisions that, as college students, as college graduates, that we need to strive towards, because really it is not poor folks who have caused this climate problem. It is not. It is the industrialized countries. It is folks who make more money and we're able to buy more and consume more and travel more. We're the ones who are causing more harm. So we really need to reflect on what we're doing and make some serious changes and be real about that. So that's my challenge as a Bronco to my fellow Broncos.
I would like to say accepted, but I'm graduating this year. So off to you, Jeff. But go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, I just want to pose a question to my fellow panelists. I know preparing for this and talking to students of, fellow students and friends, the first response that came back was, what is environmental justice? What does that even mean? And some felt shy even, tuning in, because they felt, okay, I don't really know too much about the environment, to be quite honest with you. And it can be a little scary jumping in. So what are you guys' advice? I'm leaning on you guys here, for people who might be viewing this right now, who's a little hesitant because they don't know where to start. So what are you guys' advice for that student or for that citizen of Kalamazoo?
So I can jump in here, and I'm gonna lower my hand there. But I asked this question of the Climate Justice Brain Trust a couple of months ago, just to ensure that I had my head on straight regarding environmental justice and making sure that I would be framing it appropriate for different audiences. And what they told me is essentially what I've been repeating to you all, which is always considering who has benefited and who has been burdened. So we can take it all the way back to colonial times, right? Of the founding of this country. And you think about the East Coast and a lot of the Eastern woodland tribes there who still are there today, but most of them are not federally acknowledged. Why is that? It's because if we acknowledge them, then we have to acknowledge that land was taken and not without recourse, without money, and that folks were, Eastern woodland tribes were enslaved. So we have to go through a lot of learning and reviewing our past actions and our past harms when we go through that exercise of thinking who has benefited and who's been burdened. So now I'm going to bring it to a more environmental context. So think about our beautiful national parks. What had to happen for those parks to be established? Who benefited from those parks? Who was burdened? So clearly there were folks there before when we established these parks. So we know that's a burden there. And then folks benefited by being able to see the Grand Canyon or different monuments. So those folks got to see the beauty, but then at the same time there were folks who were not admitted to see the beauty, who could not safely go on those parks. So there's a lot of very deep contextual things that have happened as we have laid the groundwork for our environmental reality. So then when we think about climate, we can stay with industrial revolution. Who did coal benefit? When folks were digging out coal, my grandfather was a coal miner, folks were digging out coal, and then early on that coal was going to power whose homes, right? You see how this, there's a lot of things that are going on. So if you practice that questioning of who is benefiting and who is being burdened, when it comes to these decisions, you will get an understanding of environmental injustices. Now, the justice piece around is how do you build some equity there? How do you build some recourse? And I'm gonna stop there because Regina does it much better than me. But that is kind of my understanding as I'm leaning on the Climate Justice Brain Trust to help me think through doing my job appropriately. And I see a question there about Secretary Holland in combating environmental injustice at a federal level. You know, I think personally, I am just delighted. I am excited because she has a different perspective, right? She has a perspective in the interior, deals with a lot of tribal lands. And this is the first time someone who's part of those communities can then sit at the helm and make decisions and come with a completely different context. As you know, no organization changes overnight, but I am prayerful that her leadership will help to change that culture so that better, more equitable decisions can be made in that sphere.
Thank you so much for that, Daniel. I'm not sure that I got your question down, but I wasn't sure if we want to open up the floor to anybody else to answer that. I know that you guys have some links with students, but otherwise we can move on to our next question. I don't see anybody else hopping in. Okay. So what has been, for those of you who are kind of established Kalamazoo residents or have been here historically, what tends to be the community response to, you know, organizations coming in and, you know, trying to make these changes? I know that there's, you know, examples of other communities such as Detroit where you go in, people are trying to come in and do things that are better for the community, but they don't actually talk to the community first. And have there been similar responses here?
So I know Patrice may have something to say. Patrice, I was on the east side growing up until my parents dragged me to Comstock, but what are your thoughts?
Well, I would venture to say that in general, what I've come to realize that there's nothing about us without us. And in the environmental space, it's no different. So no one wants to be dictated to by someone who does not live in their community what's best for their community. Now, with environmental justice, when you have a lens of race, there's a lot of education that is not there. So there may be plenty of spaces where there are not as many people of color. And so that lens is missing from that space. But that's still no excuse, because you tap into the communities and you try to educate the communities, and you still don't try to make decisions for them. You use your resources to make them available to people at the grassroots level to do that work. And so I would venture to say that, you know, organizations who are on the ground doing the work feel overlooked when you have people that come and swoop in, and then you wonder if this is about real change or if this is about some sort of self-serving credit. And that never fares well for the community. But I mean, that happens. It happens. And I think it's just important to be aware of that and to, you know, deal with that head on when it happens. And that's why it's so important for communities, for, you know, Western students to be educated, to stand up and to really not allow that to happen, because it will, unless someone stands in and stops that.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And the only thing I would add is that when you are stepping into a community that is not yours, you always need to step back and have a respectful attitude and listen. Your first job is to listen and then ask, where can I help? Where do you need me? You may not get an answer immediately, but eventually, if you are seen as someone who is trusted, who is consistent, you will get an answer. Oftentimes when I see folks come into the Kalamazoo community, and this is, I mean, this could go for a lot of communities, especially for college students, right? As a college students, we cycle in and out. We're always changing. Our attention from semester to semester is changing. The needs of the community are not changing. And the folks in the community are there for a long time. And so we need to acknowledge that and allow them to lead. The final thing, this is where I wanted to start, but the final piece is when we look at communities, we should look at them like we do organizations. We have a whole, that goes on at graduate levels about organizational development and culture and how you move through organizational change. And all of us, if you get a new job, and the first thing you have to figure out is where is everything located? How do I get things done? And then while you're trying to get things done, you learn about the politics. You learn about the barriers that are unspoken. And when it comes to making changes for environmental justice, for justice period in any community, the local community, no matter how educated you think you are, the local community knows where those barriers are. They know, yeah, even though, they make it look transparent, the decision-making, it's not. They know what the connections are, the local politics and between the people who are in power. And so that's something that you really need to know to be able to navigate and move issues forward. And it's not a solution that is developed in the cycle of a semester, or even in the cycle of someone going through college, in 4 to 5 years. So I would say support the community, but if you are dedicated to work, make sure you're bringing someone else along behind you to keep it moving. That's the biggest thing. Keep feeding the community's bodies to help and lift them up.
Thank you so much for that. So I know we have a bunch of questions that Regina can help us answer. So I'm gonna move those back so that we can get her perspective on them too. And we're gonna go into some pre-submitted questions. So one that we have is, how can we best encourage environmental activists to start placing focus on Black, Indigenous, people of color's lives when discussing the harmful effects of climate change?
Can I get clarification on that question? So that's environmental activists who are not Black, Indigenous, people of color?
I would assume so, yeah.
Okay, because I'm like, the Black, Indigenous, people of color have been screaming for, generations. Who wants to jump in there?
I think I'll give it a start. Because part of it is, I don't think that you can really say that you are an environmental justice advocate and be blind to the fact that so much of the environmental injustices that we witness, so much of the environmental racism that is present in our communities is geared in certain communities. I mean, and the majority of those communities are Black, brown, Indigenous, and poor. So I think that that's one of those first things that we just have to be upfront about. And it's okay to acknowledge that it's people of color who are being disproportionately impacted by environmental injustice. So I think that that's the first thing. I think that, honestly, I would push back on anybody that doesn't say there's an issue as it relates to race when we talk about environmental justice.
And I would say, there's a lot of folks now who all of a sudden have become environmental justice experts, right? Who are environmentalists, and now, I care about this issue, and they're able to talk the talk. But what I would ask each one of us is to acknowledge whether we know that experience. Do we live in a community that has been impacted by environmental justice issues? Is the water that we have in our community okay for us to drink? Can we grow food in the soil without there being contamination? Do we have a gap in life expectancy that Vice Mayor Griffin pointed out? Have we experienced that? And then say, do we know anyone who does? Have we seen what that impact is? Yeah, and infant mortality, as Jeff talked about. So, do we know that experience? And then if we are an environmental person and we have not, then we know we need to step back. And that's okay to do. That's okay to acknowledge. And it is beautiful to call out that, especially if you're not a Black, Indigenous person of color, to call that out and say, I see this affecting these communities. What are we going to do?
I don't think anybody could have said it better than that. So we have another question, and I think this can be geared really at everybody, is what is, could, should WMU and Kalamazoo, what should they be doing to combat environmental racism?
Well, I will lean in just as an overview, just to double down on what Dr. Brandy said. I ran across an article that was written by the Western Herald, was published in the Western Herald in 2017, and it was about environmental justice. And you all were talking with Maddie Jordan Woods, who is a staunch advocate for the north side of Kalamazoo. And there were students that were coming into a program and doing some research around, some areas on the north side. And one of the things that she highlighted is that we need for that to continue to happen. So what I would say definitely needs to happen now, if it's already not in the works, is a commitment to continue the work of Western, the students, the faculty, and everyone who has knowledge of what's happening in our community to work with the city government and just keep that going. So that's part of a system that we're creating. And so those gaps will not be, and those who are here all the time can continue to see the benefits of what is there to offer through Western and those relationships.
I love that. And I second it. Western is a powerhouse research institution. Just think of what if there were consistent, deep projects on environmental justice in Kalamazoo. The body of knowledge we have right now as a resident, as someone who, has seen the impacts in my own family, and a person who's an evaluator, we don't have enough data to prove the case that there is an issue, right? We don't have enough people screaming it to say, this needs to stop. And our leaders need to do something different. If Western students and faculty banded together over time to focus on this issue and move things forward, I really do think we can move the needle.
So I think yes to all of that. If you've been observing Western as it has progressed through COVID and through a demographic charged enrollment decline over quite a few years. Right now we're talking about sort of higher ed post-COVID and I wouldn't say restructuring, reimagining our strengths and doubling down on our strengths. And one of those coming out of academic affairs, the provost's office, is a push toward interdisciplinarity study, and I would argue transdisciplinary study, right? You need academics and students working with facilities management and then taking a trip off campus and stepping into the community for a sort of multi-partner project, which screams environmental justice, social justice, and economic justice. Do you care about the environment? I care, but do you care if you don't have meaningful work and a living wage and transit you can use to get to your job and, childcare, right? How do you overcome basic needs and contaminated places, especially perhaps in your neighborhood or in the air, and get over all of that to get to sort of the bigger movement or the bigger organized movement. So I see good signs and good opportunities for Western. Many groups at Western are imagining how ivory towers could break and people could work together more in the future, because we are already pretty good at it in many ways, and we think we can get better. So I think the time is ripe for imagining those sorts of long-term projects. And I do want to say too, not long after I first came to Kalamazoo, I was listening to a particular community organizer from a neighborhood who said something to the effect of, you know, Western folks only really come down the hill when they need us for something, and for just a little while, then they go back up the hill. And that really stuck with me as like, wow, if you're gonna do community work, you better know what you're getting into and be respectful and think about how you can help and not just drop in and fix everything, right? And I think one of these opportunities for all of us, again, is, you know, reimagining all of our systems, right? Transit systems and energy systems and distributed energy systems and community solar or virtual power purchase agreements, right? We can talk about these things, or we can have seminars or speakers to try to reimagine the future. I think that the time is ripe for that. And I'm hopeful, I would say. It's going to be hard, but I'm hopeful.
Thank you. So those were our pre-submitted questions. We're going to move into some questions that we've gotten throughout this event. First one is Dr. Brown. What is the state's commitment, if you know, to shutting down Line 5 and other potentially harmful pipelines?
So I don't know that I can speak to the state's commitment. So as you know, energy systems have a lot of intertwined parts. The governor is focused on moving us forward from fossil fuels. And we have just wrapped up the UP Energy Task Force. I think that was maybe yesterday or the day before, all the days are blurry, which looked at what was needed to increase energy reliability in the UP, to bring rates down, to reimagine the future of energy use in the UP. As you guys know, Michigan is a peninsula, and so building a grid on a peninsula has some issues that are related there. But I can tell you that I do think the governor's commitment and how she speaks through the creation of the Office on Climate and Energy, the Governor's Council on Climate Solutions. And it's really clear which direction she's going. But because I work for EGLE, which is a regulatory agency that intervened or has the permits for Line 5 and other things out there, there are some things that I just cannot address. And I can also tell you, I don't know.
Well, thank you so much for that. We have another question. Is Kalamazoo considered a food desert? In addition to the Kalamazoo Farmers Market, what other community initiatives address this issue?
Typically, when you look at food deserts, it's usually defined as having accessible, like grocery stores and places where you can get healthy foods within certain zip codes. And 49007 was a food desert prior to Park Street Market coming back, because it was a Harding's and then it closed, and then it was and then Park Street moved up there. So you've got, like, I think and please clarify part of your question for me, because are you specifically talking about how we're getting individuals in our community access to healthy foods? Or are you talking about, you know, access to grocery stores where you can purchase them? Because to me, that's two different questions. And I know you had something to say too.
I would lean towards healthy foods because I think that's what they should have access to. But I don't know if that's a harder question to answer.
I would just to piggyback on what Dr. Luchar said. What I can say is that on the east side of Kalamazoo, which is where I grew up, in the city of Kalamazoo, there is no grocery store. There are convenience stores with bread that costs $3 and milk that costs $6 and Takis and maybe an apple. And so that's something that I have been talking about for quite some time. I just brought it up the other day. Hopefully there is a plan very soon to be a grocery store, because on the east side of Kalamazoo, I would say there is a food desert.
Did the Hardings close over there, Vice Mayor?
That is not in the city. So yes, that is still there.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for the clarification.
Well, we have a new guest for the last 20 minutes or so. Hi, Miss Regina Strong. We're honored to have you. And thank you for coming to back-to-back meetings. We appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation. It's been one of those days, but I'm glad I'm here. So.
Absolutely. Well, if you wouldn't mind, I know we've been itching to ask you a couple questions as our resident expert on state policy. So could you give us a little bit of insight about what's happening at the state policy level for environmental justice?
Sure. The meeting that I was on right before this one was our monthly meeting of the Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice, or the MACEJ, as I like to call it, which is our advisory council, the first one Michigan has ever had. I'll back up and tell you a little bit about my work in my office. As the Environmental Justice Public Advocate, which is a new role that was created by Governor Whitmer in the beginning of her administration, I lead the Office of the Environmental Justice Public Advocate, and we work with the Interagency Environmental Justice Response Team. So it's all state departments coming together to really focus in on how we address environmental injustices in the state, how we look at ways to address some things systemically. And that was also part of the executive order that created my position. It also created that. One of the offshoots of that, and one of the things we worked on in the first year of the office, was creating an advisory council. We had our first in-person meeting and launched in February of 2020, and we haven't met in person since, right? So we've been meeting virtually because then COVID hit and the pandemic made it impossible for us to gather in the same room, but it really accelerated our work in terms of triaging around response to COVID and its impact on environmental justice communities, which you all know, hit communities of color and lower income communities particularly hard throughout last year. And so that body was created really intentionally of frontline community, broad geographic representation, organizations that work with community, as well as environmental organizations, labor, and also local governments, because we really wanted to have people at the table who play a role in different pieces of the work around environmental justice, as well as the advocacy, as well as tribal representation. So that's a group of about 20 folks. And there are a couple things going on right now that, we're working to, I'll back up and say, for the first couple of years, really the goal has been to create a structure to address a lot of these issues as we've been addressing them in the last year, because there's been so much that has bubbled up. And I think now we're at the point where we're trying to move forward and really have an impact on policy and look at what are the things we want to be able to address. We didn't have in the state of Michigan our own real definition of what environmental justice was. We didn't have that. So being able to work with both the advisory council and the interagency response team to define what we're talking about when we talk about environmental justice was an important first step. Because as we look to address from my office and through our work with the different advisories and councils, what we realized is a whole lot of people didn't quite understand what environmental justice is, and it can mean different things to different people, but the goal is really to address the inequities and make sure that everybody has equitable access, to our environmental laws and regulations. There's also on our website, which is michigan.gov/environmental justice, a more in-depth definition, but also some of the projects and work that we're doing, because I think getting a sense of what's possible moving forward in Michigan, when we really have not focused on environmental justice, it takes a lot. And having the other departments at the table to understand what within, say, we've got, obviously my office sits in the executive office of EGLE with a direct line to the governor's office, but so many of the issues that touch environmental justice issues are beyond environmental, right? So Department of Transportation is there, Department of Education is there, Department of Health and Human Services is there, agriculture, DNR, civil rights. We even have like state police, corrections. I'm trying to think of all the departments. There are a lot of departments because all of this touches on what impacts the community. And so when you look at the website, you'll see all the departments, but I always forget some because there are a lot that are at the table, but I think it's an important piece of the conversation. So we're doing a couple things that I think might be relevant here as well. One is we're launching some smaller group regional roundtable conversations in 8 regions of the state to really have conversations with, again, frontline community, local governments, community organizations, local businesses, to really hone in on a micro focus on regions. And so Kalamazoo, which I know we're talking about now, will be part of the Southwest conversation. We kind of had to break it up into regions. And so we've got like Southwest, Central, Detroit will be its own region roundtable, but then Southeast Michigan, Flint will be its own table. Then the Northern Lower Peninsula. As an Ohio native, I had to learn all the Northern Lower and Lower Upper and Upper Around, and I also use the hand now. But I've been here for 30 years, so you'd think I'd have figured that out. And then one in the UP as well. So we wanted to really try to do these in person, but given the virtual nature of our world right now, we decided to go on and do them virtually because the goal is to really try to hone in on some regionally specific issues as well as our big picture statewide issues. And so those are coming in April. We're doing 8 of those in April, 2 a week, very ambitious agenda because I am an office of 1.5. I like have half of another person. And we do have a facilitator who's going to be working with us on those, as well as we're working toward developing an environmental justice screening tool. So that screening tool, and some of you may be familiar with the EPA's EJ screen or Cal Enviro screen. So states have kind of taken what the federal government had at a very technical level and overlaid like social vulnerabilities and social characteristics of communities and other things that impact communities, and a historical look at some of the things that got us to where we are to create state-specific screening tools. And so my office is working on one for Michigan that is in the review process now. And we worked with stakeholders to try to identify what our initial factors would be. So I look forward to, letting you all know, and I can, share in whatever ways when that comes out. Our look is probably by early summer, but we also will be looking to get stakeholder input, and we'd be interested in hearing from folks who might want to be part of focus groups that are going to take a look at that. So I will share my email address, which is strongrr1@michigan.gov. It kind of looks like Stronger One because, somebody pointed that out to me. I had no idea, but I like it. So I didn't pick it, but I like it. So you can email me if you're interested in being part of that process. The other thing that's going on really to help us move, from, the goal, and I don't know if I talked about this at first, but the goal is really to help Michigan move from being infamous around environmental justice to really leading the way in becoming a national leader in solving some of the difficult problems. Because if there is an EJ problem, it exists in Michigan right now. And so how do we address those? How do we, use the best that's out there and move it forward in Michigan is what we're trying to do. We're also hosting Michigan's first environmental justice conference in May. So that'll be May 18th through the 20th. It'll be virtual. Again, that was another thing we wanted to try to do in person, but we're doing it this year virtually. And I can make sure that, we share some information that can be shared on that, because I believe, we have to have these conversations. We have to talk about things. We're going to have conversations on what's happening on state level, federal level, look at the things like the EJ screening tool, how we address health equity, how people can better bring comments to the state when there are opportunities for real meaningful engagement, and how we do that. So it's ambitious. It's a 3-day conference. I hope you all can participate. I think there'll be good conversations. We want to also bring in the federal perspective. As you all probably have seen, the Biden administration has prioritized equity and environmental justice in some very exciting ways. I think EJ is having a moment, right? So it is a like, you know, whiplash moment from where we were only a few months ago to where we are now, where everybody's like, what do we want to do with EJ? And how do we, and it's like, really? Okay, we've got all these things that we really want to do. And I think the federal government is even looking at how they require each department to look at integrating equity in a real way. I mean, there were previous attempts at this, and you all know this isn't the first rodeo, but I'm very encouraged by the synergy I see between what the federal government's trying to do, what we're trying to do in Michigan and in other states to really elevate environmental justice and address some of the long-standing inequities, right, that have put us where we are now. You know, one of the things that we did last year in my office is we did a training for Eagle employees on environmental justice and took them back to really some of the institutional grounding that has happened over the years, things like redlining. You know, you run into these things, so like, oh, why do people live where they live? Well, there are a lot of reasons why people live where they live, because that's the only place they could live, right? And so people often say, why do you live next to this, you fill in the blank, factory, hazardous waste site, whatever it is. But if that's where it's zoned and that's the only place you can live, those things, you know, come together. And so I think we have to be as intentional about correcting these policy issues as the folks were who created the policy that put us in these positions. So when we talk about policy, it's really about first acknowledging why things are the way they are, then figuring out how to address them. And it's not easy. I would say, as excited as I get, and Brandy will tell you that I get excited about a lot of things. It is also challenging work because change is hard, right? And people who are used to doing things 30 years one way, all of a sudden I show up, you know, with my from their quantitative, process-driven, very technical world with all these things about impact and, oh, we're gonna look at, you know, how this address, it is like we speak different languages. So I find myself having to be the translator to figure out where we connect. And that's why I'm very intentional about who I bring to the table, who can bring all sides. And that's why I'm excited about things like the EJ screen that can really show in a bright light the things that communities face. I mean, as we're going through the review of this, we're coalescing data that's never been in the same place before, right? Like all the environmental siting and, you know, where there are hospitals and schools and different overlays and where there might be a non-attainment area for a certain air pollutant. So when you look at all of that, some bright lines show up. There's some overlapping places that these things exist. So I know you asked a simple question to open this up and then I just kind of ran with it. So I'm gonna back up. There may be questions. I'll stop talking. And please, if there are things I didn't address, let me know, which I'm sure there are lots.
That was great. Thank you. I think it's a simple question, but it's not an easy answer.
Exactly.
Jeff, you have your hand up?
Yeah, Regina, so great to meet you. And I wonder how you would answer a question that I've often stumbled on over the years. Someone says to me that, let's say, paper mill maybe was the first employer, local jobs. Yeah, it was 150 years ago. And the best neighborhood in town was right next to that paper mill. And everything was perfect. There were no regulations. So why is everybody so mad now? How does the environmental justice community sort of address that sort of challenge from long ago versus where we are now?
I call it the remnants of our industrial past that are still here and moving into our future, because the jobs versus impact on people argument is used quite often to talk about the challenges in moving beyond environmental challenges, because you're right. It at one point, maybe people in the neighborhood around facilities, but more often than not, particularly if they're in low-income areas or communities of color, fewer and fewer of the people who live in the neighborhoods the most impacted are also employed by the facility. That's not true in every setting, but it's true in a lot of settings, right? And so that adds to the disconnect sometime between looking at what's best for workforce and looking at what's best for community. Add to that, that when these plants or facilities or paper mills were created, there were no environmental protections. So like in a lot of areas, the sky was like multicolored and, you know, there were smells everywhere. And we still have a lot of that, but the regulations like the Clean Air Act and some of the other things that came in, you know, over the last several decades have moved the needle. But I think we're at the point, and I think I mentioned earlier that we're at this point of convergence where I think the look at both climate change and equity and our industrial past, we're right there where everything's coming together. So as we plan for that new future and we make sure we center equity, that's how I flip that question around. That is what that was, but as we evolve, we can do better. There's technology that can make things, you know, have less impact on people. It's just how do we get companies and industries to invest in them? Usually it's by some regulation or some force of government or some, this is on YouTube, right? Okay, so let me just say that I think the ways that you move things forward have to do with policy, as we were saying. It also has to do with regulations that have teeth in them around people. We often look at things, you know, as a person, I used to work for the Sierra Club before I came to state government, and I've been a longtime advocate on a lot of equity issues as well. And I feel like people have seen those things as separate, right? So we want to save the planet and we want to conserve, or we want to help people and we want to make sure they have affordable housing and food, healthy food, and all the things they need to be whole and live. But I think those things are the same thing, right? So getting people to see that is a big part of my work. Sometimes I'm more successful than others, and I know this is a long answer to your question, but I think it's relevant in that it's not easy, because you're right. Those who are focused on either making money or workforce aren't often focused on the latter, impact on people. The people they focus on are the people that work for them and work within their buildings. So that is our challenge, but I think that is an ongoing conversation.
Thank you so much for that. We have time for one more question. It's more of a closing question. What first step or advice, and this is really to everybody, would you give to those listening today, leaders who are motivated to join the fight, the fight for environmental justice? What advice do you have?
So I think pay attention, and which I think all of you are, to what's going on. And, you know, one of the things I talk about a lot is how change happens. And I believe there's a continuum of change, right? And so first you have to bring attention to an issue, which sometimes calls for some kind of agitation, like, you know, something, bring it to attention, go to a meeting, let people know. I won't say all the ways to agitate, but I'm sure you guys can figure those out. Then you bring attention to an issue, then you figure out what it is you really want. Because sometimes you know what's wrong, but you don't know, you know, what steps to take to fix it. So then you really have to hone your ask, the advocacy ask. But then you got to figure out who can give you the change you seek, right? What's your theory of change? Who can give you that change? That calls for honing in on your message and then negotiating with who can change that. You know, yeah, creating some good trouble. I like that. I have been accused of that a time or two. So, but I think the key there is not getting stuck in one of those stages, but taking it all the way through, right? Because I think some people are really good at agitating, but not good at honing the message. Some people are really good at honing the message, but nobody hears it because they're not agitating. And then some people don't know how to get to the table and negotiate. Doesn't mean that's why organizations are more successful, because you need all those people with different skills to come together, because negotiating is the key. So I encourage people to figure out where their talents are best used. Are they the people who help tell the story or hone the ask, or, you know, come up with the march, the action that's going to help bring attention to it? Or are they the people who can sit at the table and talk to the policymakers and figure out who can give the change and not tire of the fact that this won't be a one-time shot? Like, I call it the continuum of change, not the road to change, because there's no end to it, right? It just continues. And so you have to be prepared to figure out where you fit in that. And it could change over time. Like I used to be a really good agitator. I've gotten older now. And so now I'm more in a different space in the work because I've learned more. So I think that's how you connect, like through conversations like this, and figure out, who can help you get there. Because I think connections are the key, figuring out the points of intersectionality of all the work and then helping each other. I always tell people, you can't expect people to support what you're looking to do unless you support them. So finding that connection and then moving forward would be my advice.
Thank you. Jeff, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think if you're in middle management, maybe you're an administrator, maybe you're an old dude like me, what you do is you lift up youth leaders. You lift up Taylor West and Chelsea Spayman and my friend Ida, who I believe is on the webinar, and you help them along. You have to, that's sort of what we have to do when you're in a position, especially like mine. And I would say, secondly, act locally, join your neighborhood organization, make it an environmental justice organization. Join one of the many committees that Vice Mayor Griffin sits on or runs or participates in, and make that committee an environmental justice organization around whatever issue is local to you and your neighbors. There's so much to do.
I'm not sure if anybody else wanted to hop in on that. Okay, well, then I want to thank our panelists for taking the time today to share this space. We are truly honored that you guys came from all of your different parts of higher education, local government, state government. I mean, truly, this was pretty amazing. We also want to thank our fellow students for watching and engaging today and participating in this conversation, because, it is a conversation, we need to keep having it. If you or any of your friends or constituents or people that you work with missed today's conversation, that's okay. We have it on YouTube and we will be sending out the links. Feel free to reach out for more information regarding environmental justice and the topics discussed today and last week. And Taylor wants me to make sure to tell you all to do not forget to fill out the attendance link for WMU experience. And again, thank you all for making today's event a great one. And we appreciate you taking time to learn more about the realities that marginalized communities in our country and in our community face.
I don't even know how. Oh, hold on.
I can't figure it out.
I can't figure it out either. It's okay. View.
I think, well, I don't think either of us are the host, actually.
I'm a co-host, but it's fine. To those listening, got it. We're not the tech savvy ones. YouTube.
Everybody's still here. Thank you for coming.
Thank
people.
So I'm just gonna turn it off.
Yep.
Okay.
If we all leave the meeting, does it turn off?
I'm pretty sure.
Okay. All right. Bye, Taylor.
Bye, everybody. Have a great night.